I got married at 22 to a girl I went to school with, and soon after, our daughter was born. My family wasn't particularly fond of her at first, but eventually, they accepted her, and things seemed to settle down. In the early years, my mother and wife would get into arguments now and then, and I found myself stuck in the middle, trying to calm both sides. Neither of them felt like I was on their side, and that led to a lot of tension. Both my mother and my wife were hurt, thinking I wasn't being supportive enough. Money was tight, as we were both from out of town and didn't come from wealthy families. There was no safety net to fall back on, no help from relatives, so I had to work nonstop. I was at work until late in the evening, and when I came home, I'd spend the nights doing side jobs for other companies just to make ends meet. The pressure was immense, and though I tried to help my wife with our child, the exhaustion was wearing me down. I would take our daughter for walks in the evening after work, 2, sometimes 3 hours at a time. I wanted to be there for her, to give my wife some rest, but I'll admit, I wasn't always doing it with the best of spirits. There were times when I was so drained. I felt like I was going through the motions without much enthusiasm. I wasn't as present as I should have been, but my wife, she never complained. She worked hard too. She took care of the home, cooking, cleaning, making sure everything was in order. I am grateful to her for that. She carried so much of the burden while I was out working. In those moments, though, I felt like we were both just surviving, not really living. We were doing what needed to be done, but there was little room for anything else. The weight of responsibility pressed down on both of us, and though we never really spoke about it, I could feel the distance growing between us, like something was slipping through our fingers, slowly and quietly. A few years passed, and the weight of life started pressing down on us. I was working constantly, and my wife had just returned to work after her maternity leave. Money was always tight. We couldn't afford our own place for a while, so we took out a loan, bought an apartment, only to end up being swindled by the developers. That was a heavy blow, and it felt like the universe had turned against us. Around that time, my wife became suspicious, convinced I was hiding money from her. She was stressed and restless, always on edge. Then she did something I never expected. She went to see a fortune teller. I didn't take it seriously at first, but when she came back, everything changed. The fortune teller told her I had a mistress, and that all the money I'd been earning was going toward this imaginary affair. The accusation hit me like a punch to the gut. I tried to reason with her, to explain that none of it was true, but she wasn't listening. A fight broke out, one of the worst we've ever had. She asked me to leave. For the next 2 months, we lived separately. That first month, I spent my days torn apart. I wanted to go back to her, back to my daughter. I begged her to take me back, to believe me. But as the days passed, something inside me shifted. I stopped pleading, stopped pushing. I decided to let things play out however they would. If she wanted to come back, I'd be waiting. And then, one day, she reached out to me. Out of the blue, she suggested we talk and maybe try again. Of course, I was thrilled, and without hesitation, I went back. I was overjoyed to be with her and our daughter again. After that, life resumed its familiar rhythm. Work and home, home and work. The demands never seemed to stop. I took on extra freelance jobs to make ends meet, but that meant less time for family. I was constantly exhausted, and I know I wasn't giving them the attention they deserved. I felt it in the quiet moments, that gap between us growing wider, but I was too worn out to address it. Then, everything changed again when I landed a high-paying job. Suddenly, we could breathe a little easier. With the money coming in, we decided to take out a mortgage. It felt like a fresh start. I was taking on even more projects, earning well, but the strain in our relationship lingered. It was subtle, but it was there. A distance neither of us could name. We bought a new apartment, started on the renovations, and for a brief time, that project brought us closer. We were working together, making decisions about our future. There was a sense of shared purpose that we hadn't felt in a long time. But as soon as the renovations were done, the demands crept back in. There was always something else we needed. More money, more projects. Vacations, too. We'd travel, sometimes abroad, sometimes to the coast, but it had to be the best, always the best conditions. And so, the cycle continued. More work, more stress. We were building a life, but somewhere along the way, I began to wonder if we were losing each other in the process. I kept working hard, trying to provide for my family, but nothing I did seemed to be enough for her. To her, I was always falling short, not like her friends' husbands who were, in her eyes, perfect. 10 years of marriage, and I never cheated, never drank, never went out with the guys. My only goal was to take care of my girls, to make sure they never wanted for anything. I know I wasn't the most affectionate, and I didn't always spend as much time with them as I should have, but I thought my hard work would make up for it. Yet, whenever I did try to show my wife tenderness, she'd scoff at me or pull away, asking if something was wrong with me, if I was sick or something. Over time, I just stopped trying. I convinced myself that she didn't need my affection, or maybe didn't even want it. It ate at me, though. On the outside, I'm not the softest person. Maybe a little rough around the edges, but deep down, I'm kind, and I felt the weight of not being able to express that to her. And she, well, she never really gave me any affection in return. No matter how much I craved it, I had to live without it. Our intimacy became scarce, happening only when she decided it was necessary. I was climbing the walls some days, frustrated, but I kept quiet, bottling it all up. Then came my last big project. It was a golden opportunity, one that promised to be extremely lucrative. Right around that time, we had a huge argument. She was demanding more of my time, more of my presence at home, but I tried to make her understand. I explained that if she could just hold on for a few more months, I would finish this project, make enough money to step back, drop all the side jobs, and finally focus on our family. We could start fresh, I told her. But she wasn't hearing me. The stress of it all weighed heavily on me. I was juggling so much, constantly on edge, and then it happened. A stroke, at 30 years old. It was like the world stopped spinning. One moment I was pushing myself to the limit, and the next, I was in a hospital bed, unable to walk properly, my body betraying me in ways I never imagined. I lost 25 kilograms in just 3 months, unable to keep food down, weakened beyond recognition. My entire life, everything I had worked for, was unraveling before my eyes. Through all this, it was my mother who stayed by my side. She was the one there, day in and day out, holding my hand when I could barely move, encouraging me when I wanted to give up. My wife, well, she'd come by. She'd visit for an hour each day, but it always seemed like she had somewhere more important to be. She was busy with work, always in a rush, always something else to do. She stayed home with me for 3 days after I was discharged, but then it was back to her routine. One day with me, then back to work. It was clear her priorities had shifted long ago, and there I was, lying in that hospital bed, realizing just how far we had drifted apart. I managed to finish the project, even with everything crumbling around me. But it didn't come without a price. Depression hit hard, and the recovery process from the stroke was slow and painful. The doctors weren't giving me much hope. They said it would be a long road, full of uncertainty. I was constantly searching for ways to heal, trying to find my footing again. People kept suggesting that I go to a health resort, someplace where I could focus on my recovery. But during all of this, my wife seemed to be in her own world, focused entirely on herself. I told her about the sanatorium, thinking we could go together, hoping it would bring us closer while I worked on getting better. She had other plans. She insisted we take a trip to the sea instead. She said it would do me good, and besides, our daughter needed it too. I tried to explain that this wasn't what the doctors meant, that I needed real treatment, real rehabilitation, but she wouldn't listen. In the end, she went to the beach with our daughter and her mother, while I went to my parents. I was too weak to argue anymore, and deep down, I was afraid of what might happen if I didn't have someone to care for me. My worst fears nearly came true. While staying with my parents, I had another episode, a small stroke, but I got lucky. It wasn't as bad as it could have been. 3 months passed. I was clinging to the hope that things between us could be fixed, that the woman I married was still there somewhere, that maybe all of this could somehow bring us back together. But then, one day, she told me straight. She didn't love me anymore. I'd been dreading those words for months, always feeling like I was just waiting for the inevitable. I begged her to reconsider, to think it over before making any decisions. I wasn't ready to lose her. We dragged it out for another 6 months, during which I had to go through another surgery. And then, the final blow came. I found her text messages. She'd been talking to a friend of ours, confiding in him, confessing feelings for him, but he rejected her. Even after that, she turned to someone else, reconnecting with a guy she liked before we were even together. She poured her heart out to him, calling him the love of her life, and me? I was nothing more than a mistake in her eyes. It was the last straw. There was a huge fight, and I walked out. I left everything to our daughter, not wanting to take anything with me. Later, I found out that all this time, her and her mother had been saying I was just a burden, that I'd been freeloading off them while I was sick. It cut deeper than I thought possible. Now, it's been a year since I walked out. She's been with someone new for 6 months, some guy she met in a bar. Meanwhile, I'm living on my own, renting a small place, trying to rebuild my life, piece by piece. I've thrown myself into work, doing everything I can to recover physically and emotionally, but the weight of it all still presses down on me. Depression creeps in at times, and I find myself sinking back into that darkness. I know I've made my share of mistakes too. I'm not perfect, not by a long shot, and I can't shake the feelings I still have for her, even after everything. There's a part of me that can't let go, that's still holding on, despite the pain. She constantly accuses me of not appreciating her, of never being tender or affectionate enough. And when I was, she didn't seem to want it anyway. Now, she's with her Tinder man, as she calls him. She's changed so much since we parted ways. She's full of life, constantly out at clubs, always the center of attention, surrounded by new friends she's met at bars, acting like some kind of socialite. Of course, there's a fortune teller involved too. Apparently, she's been giving her advice, telling her to leave me because I'm such an angry person. Funny enough, I'd always asked her, long before the stroke, whenever the thought crossed my mind, if something bad were to happen to me, would she stay by my side? Without hesitation, she would reassure me, of course I would. But now? Now she throws it back in my face, saying, would you really want me to stay out of pity? What's ironic is that I did everything I could for our family. I worked myself to the bone, thinking that I was doing the right thing. But it turns out, that kind of sacrifice goes unnoticed, unappreciated. I realize now, you can't kill yourself trying to be everything for someone else. It's not worth it if they don't see it, if they don't value it. You also have to be careful with the ones you marry. Some are delicate, fragile in ways you might not even realize until it's too late. People show their true selves in moments of crisis. And this, I've come to accept, wasn't the woman meant for me. Maybe she never was.